特朗普签署7000亿美元国防授权案，印太战略与亚太再平衡战略究竟有何不同？美国前助理国务卿丹尼尔·罗素做客风云对话，聚焦亚太。
There are some very, very obvious differences, and of course there are dramatic stylistic differences between President Trump and President Obama.
美国对朝鲜软硬兼施，朝核问题走向如何？
Nobody is prepared to accept North Korea as a legitimate nuclear power.
风云对话连续邀请多位美国嘉宾，为您解读特朗普政权下的亚太政策。
Mr. Russell, most welcome. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
丹尼尔·罗素2009年进入白宫国家安全委员会，主管日本、韩国和朝鲜事务。2011年，丹尼尔·罗素开始担任总统特别助理和国家安全委员会亚洲事务高级主管。期间，他帮助时任总统奥巴马制定了亚太再平衡战略，将美国的战略要点，包括军事、政治和外交资源的分配，从欧洲、中东和阿富汗转至亚太地区。2013年，罗素被奥巴马任命为东亚和太平洋事务助理国务卿。2017年卸任。丹尼尔·罗素的工作重点一直与亚太紧密相关，被认为是奥巴马转向亚洲政策中的核心人物。
Good morning, Dan. Thank you for coming to Phoenix and having this interview with us.
Thanks for having me, Xiaotian. Happy to be here.
So you are called the face of the America's rebalance to Asia policy. So can you please tell us some background of this policy and whether, and I'm sure yes, and why did you find it necessary at the time?
Well, the rebalance policy deserves a better face than mine on it, and I nominate President Barack Obama because this really was a reflection of his strategy and his belief. You know, right now the U.S. economy is very, very strong, and so it's easy to forget, but in January of 2009, when Obama took office, the U.S. was reeling from a very, very serious economic crisis. And President Obama's focus was, how can he put the U.S. economy on a steady, long-term track towards sustainable prosperity? And one of his key conclusions was that because the Asia-Pacific region, with its youthful demographics and its dynamism, is and was the clear driver of global economic growth, and because the United States itself is a Pacific nation, it was absolutely essential to ensure that the U.S. was fully engaged in the economic, the social, the cultural, the political, and the security life of the Asia-Pacific.
So you mean this initiative, in the first place, was from the sense of the economic engagement, but rather than seeing a real bigger economic engagement, what we saw was heightened military tensions. How would you respond on this?
Oh, I don't see it that way at all. I know from my experience in the White House that the thinking of President Obama, of Vice President Biden, of the senior team, went along 4 or 5 lines regarding Asia. First and foremost was to ensure that our relationships with our close friends, partners, and security allies, like Japan, like Australia, like the Republic of Korea, were in good shape. You start with your friends. Secondly, we worked on building up strong institutions in the Asia-Pacific region. So President Obama decided that the United States would join and participate with ASEAN in the East Asia Summit. He made APEC a priority. He engaged in opening negotiations for what ultimately led to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There was a strong belief that the U.S., along with China, should be active in participating in multilateral institutions. Right. A third element was the economic agenda and the effort to create an open, balanced, inclusive trading environment. Fourth was the effort to engage with emerging powers and new partners in the Asia-Pacific region. At the top of that list was China, and President Obama placed a high priority on establishing good, sustainable, cooperative relations with China that were honest, that dealt candidly with the areas of difference, but also looked to develop practical cooperation. But lastly, Xiaotian, there was one other thing. Our rebalance strategy was founded on universal values, on the importance of international law, of the principle that all countries, no matter how strong they are or how rich they are subject to the same rules and the same norms as every other country. And that was an important component of the rebalance, or how rich they are.
感觉丹尼尔·罗素啊，他不管是说话还是他的思维逻辑，都是白宫范儿十足。Okay, thank you for your comments. I think that lead to three aspects of the discussion. Two related to my previous question. Another one is the rule of laws. So for the economic parts, well, we didn't see really as big as a movement compared to what we expected in 2009. For example, the TPP is not through in the end. And there's the AIIB initiated by China that America is not a part of it. And then in the military sense, I mean, some regional country in the Asia Pacific may have felt that all the efforts would sort of having another agenda. And then lastly, the rule of laws. I mean, there's the water disputes in this region, and America, as a country that is not a party of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, doesn't really have a steady footing on this issue. However, there's a big voice always.
Well, that's a big set of questions. So on the economic front, I think that over the span of the 8 years of the Obama presidency, that America's trade and its economic engagement with the entire Asia-Pacific region expanded in a very significant way. The fact is, we successfully negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and it does exist, unfortunately, without the United States. It exists now as the TPP-11. But American investment in Asia is up. American trade with Asia, including and especially trade with China, is way up. More and more American exports, more products have found their way into most of the Asian market. So I think there's an important and positive trend on the economic side. In terms of security, the United States remains steady in our determination to contribute to the stability and the security of the Asia-Pacific region. We are committed to maintaining free and open maritime space, airspace, outer space. We want to ensure that the rights of not only America's allies and partners, but all countries are respected. And I think that whether it is in response to disasters like the tsunami and earthquake in Japan, or Hurricane Typhoon Haiyan that hit the Philippines, whether it is in anti-piracy, whether it's just protecting the sea lanes, the role of the U.S. military and the role of the U.S. Navy and 7th Fleet.
Is that the purpose of the deployments of the 2,500 Marines to Australia as a combat ship in Singapore?
Right. So the Marines who rotate through Darwin and Australia conduct exercises jointly, not only with Australia, but with Malaysia, with other Southeast Asian countries, in order to train and in order to prepare to respond to disasters. That's not a threat to anyone. That's a net plus for security. I think, Xiaotian, that if you take a look at the relationship between the PLA and the U.S. military, what you will see is there is now an increased and a very healthy dialogue on the military-to-military track. There are examples of cooperation and of joint exercises and training. I think that on the military and the economic side, we've seen a lot of progress. And when it comes to the rule of law, You're absolutely correct to point out that the United States hasn't ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, despite the efforts of my former boss, John Kerry, President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and many others. But at the same time, the U.S. abides by the terms of the Law of the Sea Convention. We abide by them scrupulously. We, like others, have a stake in international law, in global norms, and it's certainly an important component of American strategy.
在奥巴马宣布重返亚洲政策的同时，提出了美国10年军事战略，计划在10年内削减4500亿美元的国防开支，但强调将在亚洲加强部署，并且在南海问题上对华态度强硬。而在经济方面，奥巴马政府积极推动跨太平洋伙伴关系协定，与成员国开展多边合作，并将其视为美国重返亚太的关键所在。
We're going to sign 3 memorandums right now. The first one is withdrawal from the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
然而时过境迁，特朗普上台后，在经济领域决绝地退出 TPP， 重新回归美国优先。军事方面，将国防开支提升至7000亿美元。面对朝鲜半岛核问题等地区安全挑战，军事优先是特朗普亚太政策中的特点。 但在南海问题上，美军在公开表态方面则有所收敛。特朗普对奥巴马的重返亚太政策究竟是颠覆还是延续？丹尼尔·罗素给出了自己的看法。
So, how would you describe, in general, the legacy of pivotation?
Well, I think that we have built a tradition of multilateral cooperation. In the Asia-Pacific region. And I think that we have established some great examples of U.S.-China cooperation. Now, some of them have been dealt with setbacks, like U.S.-China cooperation in climate change. I consider that to be a very important success story in the Obama presidency.
But do you see this being carried on by Trump administration?
Well, yes and no. There are some very, very obvious differences, and of course there are dramatic stylistic differences between President Trump and President Obama. Withdrawal from TPP, the abandonment of the Paris Climate Accord, the emphasis on self-interest in America first as opposed to multilateralism, the focus on bilateral trade deals and trade deficit instead of global economic integration. There's no question those are different. That said, there are many, many points of continuity. The fact that President Trump began his first Asia trip in Japan and then South Korea before continuing on to China, well, that's indicative of emphasis on our friends and allies. Although he uses the phrase Indo-Pacific, in practice, his presence at APEC, his willingness to attend the summit with the ASEAN leaders and so on, show a consistency with the Asia-Pacific rebalance strategy. So I see a lot in common.
So you think that's just a word game? Change of the terms, but the substance is the same?
I think that the substance is the same, and although senior officials say that, quote, the era of strategic patience is over, they're demonstrating strategic patience by not rushing to a military solution and by not rushing to take the bait of a phony North Korean negotiation on North Korea's terms that locks in an illegal nuclear program that neither China nor the U.S. is willing to accept.
What does rebalance really mean?
It means getting the balance right, making sure that the attention, the economic investment, the military assets, the diplomatic presence of the United States is commensurate with U.S. national interests.
So it's a sort of self-rebalance instead of a geographic rebalance.
It has a geographic dimension in the sense that...
The geographic dimension in the sense is from Middle East to Asia Pacific, or in some other interpretation is between Northeast Asia to Southeast Asia.
Well, you could make the argument for each of those shifts. It's not that the United States ever turned away or turned its back on the Middle East or the problems of Iraq or Afghanistan. We didn't turn our back on them.
But you just withdraw the troops.
We withdrew many troops, but we sought to
Was
ensure...
that the right timing to do that?
I'll leave that argument to the Middle East experts. But what we saw, I think, is an effort to ensure that the engagement that we have sustained in fighting ISIS and fighting Al-Qaeda and fighting terrorism in the Middle East didn't prevent us from investing in the future, didn't prevent us from engaging appropriately in the Asia-Pacific region. Within the Asia-Pacific region, I think you're right to say that there was a rebalance within the rebalance in that we put much more attention and time into America's important relationship with the countries of Southeast Asia.
And so you may not be an expert on Middle East, but you're an expert on balance and rebalance. With this pivot to Asia policy being carried out, do you really see the global situation balanced?
Well, I think that the increased engagement by the United States with partners like Japan and Australia, as well as the partnership with China, created greater cooperation in other regions beyond Asia.
So you don't see the Syrian crisis, the Ukrainian crisis, the refugee crisis compared to the pivot to Asia is sort of unbalanced?
Well, there's no question that it's a messy world and there are a lot of problems, but there are relatively few problems that can be solved.
如何解决朝核问题，一直是亚太地区的一大关切。奥巴马执政时期，虽然中国、美国、俄罗斯、日本、朝鲜、韩国举行了6方会谈，但随着朝鲜的退出，无疾而终。此后，奥巴马的亚太再平衡战略也被普遍认为重心不在朝鲜半岛，而是向中国南海所在的东南亚地区倾斜。特朗普执政后，美国则在朝鲜问题上一方面采取极限施压政策，对朝鲜展开一系列制裁。特朗普还在社交网站上对朝鲜不断炮轰。而另一边，美对朝政策又表现出实用主义与灵活性。本周，美国国务卿蒂勒森发表演讲时说，美国仍然希望通过外交方式解决朝核问题。
We're ready to talk anytime North Korea would like to talk. And we're ready to have the first meeting without precondition. Let's just meet. And we can talk about the weather if you want.
Well, the most obvious example is North Korea. It's not a good strategy for the United States to point a finger at China and say, you have to solve this, and for China to point a finger at the United States and say, well, this is your problem and this is your fault. What is a good strategy is for the United States and China in a clear, honest, strategic way to examine our respective interests. Where do they overlap? Well, we know that they overlap in our strong commitment to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. They overlap in our categorical objection to North Korea's nuclear program and its ballistic missile program. They overlap in our belief that the terms of the UN Security Council resolution are binding and must be respected by North Korea. And they overlap in our belief that the North Korean people are suffering needlessly, that this is a dangerous and unstable situation, and that we should look for a peaceful way out that avoids the pitfall of legitimizing North Korea's nuclear program.
Right. But do you think it's a good idea for President Trump and Kim Jong-un have this constant, eloquent exchanges on social media?
I do not think it's a great idea. To me, no good will come of an exchange of insults. And my own belief is that it is below the dignity of the President of the United States. At the end of the day, North Korea will have to recognize that the isolation and the difficulties that it faces can be ended by taking steps to gradually come into compliance with its obligations and its own commitments, that nobody is seeking to bring down the regime. Nobody is seeking to precipitate a war on the Korean Peninsula, but nobody is prepared to accept North Korea as a legitimate nuclear power or allow Kim Jong-un to threaten the entire region and the welfare and the national security of China, South Korea, Japan, the United States. We can't let that go on.
What's your perspective on this Indo-Pacific strategy and what sort of a change in your vision this strategy can bring to this region?
Well, many of my friends and counterparts throughout Asia have asked me what this strategy is and what it means. The fact that they don't know isn't a good sign. If the Indo-Pacific is going to be more than just a label or a catchphrase or a bumper sticker, then the Trump administration is going to have to demonstrate in geostrategic terms, in economic terms, and in values terms what it is and how it reflects U.S. principles and U.S. interests. So right now we have very little to go on. Is it a strategy to contain China? Is it a strategy to focus more on America's relationship with democracies like India and Australia? Will the Indians want that? They have their own strategy, the Act East policy, and important relations between Delhi and Beijing as well.
So it remains confusing and mysterious for the time being. This is our working area and some of our previous guests.
Yeah, I see some faces. My own host. I think I remember you interviewing me.
Yeah? It was 2 years ago. Yes, that's right.
接着为您播出的是《龙行天下》。
Leaders of Phoenix was actually posted on your website.